John Brennan here with MMA Tea Company. I am joined today by beautiful Bob Meloni for our Industry Insider Series. Bob, how are you doing today?
John, I'm doing great, man. I appreciate you reaching out to talk to me. And, I missed the sport, so at least I'm getting a little taste talking to you.
Yeah, it's different because usually I'm on the other end of this. You're usually calling me and setting it up and asking the questions, or you're interviewing me after the fight. So I like being on this side too. It's cool to be able to interview you and kind of get your perspective on some of these things we're going to talk about.
Sounds
So
good.
the first thing I wanted to ask you is why regional MMA? I mean, I know you work for the U.S. Postal Service, and that's kind of your full-time thing. So why put so much time? Because I know you put a lot of time into regional MMA, working with My MMA News and going to these events, announcing, doing things like that.
Well, when I first got started, and I was lucky that, be in the right place in the right time back in like 2004, 2005, my cousin Felix Martinez, who was in the New Jersey Martial Arts Hall of Fame now, came to me and said, Bob, I'm going to, I love the sport of mixed martial arts. I'm gonna go in and full bore and try to be a promoter. And it was going to be a lot of family involvement. So the main reason he was doing it is not just because he loved the sport, but he loved the fighters. And he always told me, if it's not for the fighters, we don't have this. So he says, I'm going to do everything I can to provide for the fighters. I want them to have, fresh fruit and cold water and Gatorade backstage. And it was all about the fighters we all took that motto. And sorry about the dog. The wife's taking care of her.
It's
But
all good.
when we first started, it was all about the fighters, and that's what we built it on. And I've taken that and always used that as my mantra and what I believed in. And regional MMA, it was what was the most accessible to me. I mean, I could go to local shows. I'm not going to be able to go. Listen, there's not like a lot of money to be made in the media, except for like the big MMA junkies and things like that. So for me to be near the fighters and to be close to the action and the things that I love, obviously it was going to be the regional MMA. And you know what, once you start doing it, I mean, I'll talk to amateur fighters who are making their debut. I've talked to UFC and Bellator guys, but it's always fun to talk to the people who are helping the sport grow, the younger people, even if they may not make it to the UFC. You know what I mean? And that's where I made my bones with the amateurs and moving up into regional MMA. And in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, it's a rich tradition. I mean, there's some amazing schools, some amazing fighters. And the thing about it is that I learned early on is they're good people too. Fighters are good guys. It's not like guys who are going into bars and looking for fights. It's not about, being mean. The good fighters are humble and they're good teammates. And that's the kind of thing that attracted me to the regional sport where it's built. And I've made so many great friends, lifelong friends, inside the cage, out of the cage. And that part for me, it's brought such joy and friendship and many great relationships. So I really enjoy the regional scene. I've gone to the UFC. And like I said, I talk to the pro fighters, but to me it's more personable and I enjoy it more regionally.
Sure. And you said something that's, really interesting there is that these fighters that are on these regional cards, they're not the people that are going out and getting in bar fights. And I think that even though the UFC now has this, mega deal with ESPN and it's, broadcast in every country, it still kind of has that stigma of, you're an MMA fighter, so you're just going out and getting in bar fights. So what, like, what kind of, I don't want to say promotion, but what kind of things did you learn, dealing with these fighters and talking to them that kind of made you think like, oh, this is more than just, these guys going out and beating the snot out of each other?
Well, listen, when you you know, when you like look at it and see what they go through just to get into the cage. I mean, a training camp, and let's talk about the amateur level, because you're taking time away from your family or from whatever you want to do to put yourself through a vicious training camp. You're trying early on, you're trying to get sponsors, which are difficult to get. It costs you money. It costs you money to train. It costs you money for supplements. You can get injured that you don't get paid for, and it's just about the grind and the admiration, and just about listen, win or lose, anybody who gets in that cage, in that ring, on that mat, I have the utmost respect for. And I like telling the story. What I interview for the My MMA News website, when I tell a fighter, I tell them your career is like a story, and each fight is a different chapter. And I like to be a storyteller. I mean, I've always like enjoyed that. I've always been into sports and always been into like the you know, the commentary and things like that. And I enjoy helping to tell this fighter's story, and that's out of respect, because I listen. I'm not. I've never fought. I mean, I trained for a couple of years when I was younger, but the work that they put in compared to what they're rewarded with,
Mhm.
it's not even close. Fighters
Mhm.
should make a lot more money. And like I said, when you're an amateur, you're not making anything. So I'm in this to help fighters get their name out there, self-promote them. I try to help them the best I can, and it makes me feel good about myself. I'm an older guy now compared to a lot of the guys in the sport. I'm 52 years old now. Most of the guys I talk to, you know, 19, 20 years old. It's not just old guys that I talk to. And you know what? If I can give anybody, point them in the right direction, it makes me feel good. I'm trying to make a contribution to the sport as the best I can. And, you know, I've, right now I'm currently working for a bunch of different promotions. I
Mhm.
mean, let me give a shout out to all of them. I mean, over in Delaware, Stellar Fights, Brad Dalton, I'm doing ring announcing for him. He's been, you know, promoting fights in Delaware for over 10 years. Uh, I worked for a long time for XFE and David Feldman, who really gave me a lot of opportunity to work on my craft as far as being like a Joe Rogan kind of on the regional scene, commentary, going into the ring and interviewing the fighters afterwards, which I love to do. Uh, Gary Grant Jr., who is USKA, who is a great guy, always looks out for the fighters. I do post-fight interviews for him. And right now, currently, Art of War Cage Fighting, Mike Bickings, who is such a great friend. I consider him like a brother to me, and we're a really up-and-coming promotion. I'm doing the interviews there after the fight, and the commentary with my man, the big homie, Justin Haskell. And, of course, Eric Kowal.
Mhm.
Listen, Eric has opened many doors for me. And, you know, My MMA News is, I think, one of the greatest combat sports sites on the planet. It's given me access. It helps me learn. There's a great staff there. So I just, you know, it's my fun job, John. You know what I mean? And I love, you know, helping the fighters any way I can. I've been cage side for over 1,000 fights, man. That's a lot of
Really?
fights.
That is a
Over a
lot of
thousand.
fights.
I've been cage high, and it's really, if you've never sat next to the cage for a fight, it's just crazy good, man. I've been blessed, man. I'm so thankful for what I've been able to do and still continue to do. And I plan on not stopping anytime soon. As soon as this crazy pandemic gets over and you guys can get back in there to grinding and beating people up, I can't wait to be there to talk about it and to help you guys keep getting your name out there.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. And it's funny because you and I have kind of been in the same circles. I mean, I made my debut with XFE, so we've kind of been around each other since my debut. You know, 6-ish years ago as an amateur, and then you know you've been around the sport even much longer than that. I mean, you said 2004, 2005. How have you seen the sport as a whole on a regional level evolve from when you first started to where Art of War is now, you know, selling out the 2300 arena?
I think, you know what, competition has been good for the sport because there's been more promotions going into business, trying to, you know, create something for themselves. I mean, I cover not only just art, but I cover Ring of Combat in Atlantic City, which Louis Neglia has been promoting for years, and he's a legend in the sport. He's sent over 130 of his fighters to the UFC. So I think just the sport has evolved just like the promotions have. And, just like over time, everything gets better. You know what I compare it to is like, even though I don't train jujitsu, the more you do things, the better you get.
Sure.
So the more I've done this, I feel like I always listen. I'll watch myself on film and I'll critique myself if I do something wrong. And I just want to get better. Just like a fighter will watch themselves on film and say, I got to correct that. I can be better. And that's another thing that's come along with the sport is film. The more promotions that are on film, you can watch yourself film, and the evolution of the sport itself has, for me, gone to the next level because it's more of a science and an art now. It's not just a fight.
Sure. And I have felt that as a fighter of I was very one-dimensional early on, and I knew that if I wanted to, get better, advance, make it to the next level, I had to kind of evolve and add new things to my game. And now, I mean, you talked about talking to these 19, 18, 20-year-old kids. I got like Christian Carr that I got to try to keep pace with in the gym. And then I'm talking to like Sid Ross and Dylan Harnish, Josh Quintero, these young kids. And I'm like, man, when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, this was the last thing on my mind. Like that was not where I could have seen myself. And the level of fighter that these kids are at that age, it's amazing. And they're only getting better at a younger age. And it's fun to watch the sport evolve. I mean, from my position, I'll be 30 in October, so I'm considered old in MMA now, right? To see, what's coming as the next wave. Um, and I wanted to talk to you about, that next wave of where we're going in terms of regional MMA. Because you talked about how the fighters aren't paid very well, which, we're not. I don't think that's a secret to anyone. Amateur fighters aren't paid at all. Where do you see regional MMA and more specifically, amateur fights going in the future to try to, I don't want to say legitimize the sport in a lot of people's eyes, but bring those amateurs to a place where it's financially viable for them to put in a training camp, get those supplements, do those things they need to do, and not lose money on every fight? Because every amateur fight I had, I lost money.
Well, one thing that Art of War is heading towards is streaming. If you're hooked up with a streaming site where you can get more exposure, because the more exposure you get as a fighter, obviously the more opportunity you're going to get, and it's a little bit easier to sell yourself to the sponsorships. And you listen, regionally, that's one of the hardest things to do. Is you have to remember that you have to start from the get-go. You have to build a fan base, because listen, you have to sell tickets. Fighters have to realize at a young age that promoters don't want to lose money. Okay, promoters want to make money, or even at least break even if they put on a fight. So if you're not selling tickets, it's difficult for promoters to want to use you. So you need to start early on promoting yourself with social media, and be smart about it. And don't be afraid to ask people. Don't be afraid to be told no. Reach out to supplement companies, glove companies, MMA tees. I love what you guys are doing. God bless you guys for helping some of the fighters on the scene. Listen, every dollar counts for these young guys. You know what I mean? So it's a process. I mean, you're starting down here and you have to build yourself up. Listen, and you use whatever accessibility and whatever friends and family you have. I mean, Johnny Garb, who's a buddy of mine, he's an amateur fighter. He's got 12 or 13 sponsors because, of his family and who he knows. He's a great kid. And, you have to learn early on to use that to your advantage. You can't just be somebody who goes to the gym and trains. That's great to become a great fighter, but early on to build your career and build up your resume, you want to promote yourself. And you talk about guys like Christian Carr, who's my dude. I love him. Dylan Harnish texts me all the time, man. That's my little dude, man. He's not afraid to ask me, and that's what I love it, because these guys ask me, and I'm honest with them.
Mhm.
I tell these guys, look, don't. I know you want to be a professional fighter. Everybody doing this sport, working hard, wants to be a professional fighter. But I try to tell them you also need to have other plans.
Mhm.
You know, what you're one injury away from not being a professional fighter.
Yep.
It's really a difficult way to make a living. You're not earning a 401k. Your health care is questionable. So work hard, but if you want to own a gym or something like that in the future, that's something to work for. But also keep your eye and work on a career besides fighting. It's just very unrealistic to think you're going to be a professional fighter for your career. It really is. I mean, the chances are very slim. It really is. So you need to keep your options open and be smart about it. I mean, Christian, you know him. He's one
Mhm.
of the hardest workers we know. He's got a job. He has his plans. He wants to be a professional fighter, but he also has, something that he's going to, he's going to do besides fighting. And that's really what all fighters starting out young need to do. They need to get that right advice and not think you're just going to be a professional fighter for your career, because you're going to
Sure.
be let down most of the time.
Absolutely. And a lot of times, what I've seen is fighters focus a lot on the training, the fighting, that aspect of it, which you should, right? You're a professional fighter. But where a lot of people, I don't want to say drop the ball, but just don't put as much work in and much time in, is growing their personal brand, right? Because it's kind of the Conor McGregor effect. Conor McGregor got to the top of the world because he built a brand that was recognizable by anyone. Um, so not who, but like, what have you seen in terms of brand building, with these regional fighters? That is something that, could be some advice for these young and up and coming fighters on how they can model themselves to, get those sponsors and do those things.
Well, being nice,
Mhm.
like I said, you guys like Phil the Hitman Caracappa, who's right on the cusp of becoming a UFC fighter. Guys like him, uh, Andre Petrosky, uh, Joe Bodybags Piper. These guys have personality, and like I
Mhm.
said, they're not afraid to ask people and to try to, you can have to listen. You have to sell yourself, but you also have to be humble about it, and you can do that. If you're working a job, they're obviously going to know you're a fighter. Start there. Start with your friends. Try to branch out, and like I said, don't be afraid to say no.
Mhm.
And social media is huge, John. If I do an interview with a fighter, you need to share that and tag everybody
Mhm.
and get people to know who you are. Show your face. If you're a good looking dude, get your face out there. You know what I mean? And sell yourself, but be humble, and good things will come to you. It's just like working hard in the gym. You got to work hard at this too. You got to be able to try to sell some tickets and try to get people to like you, because you know what? You never know who, the next Chuck Liddell is, or the next George St. Pierre. And
Mhm.
if a company is investing in them early, it could pay off.
Absolutely. And I mean, our philosophy at MMA T Company is that every, fighter in the UFC, Bellator, PFL, ONE FC, Invicta, what have you, they all start on the regional circuit, right? Every fighter on that level came up through some kind of regional promotion. It's very, very rare you jump into the UFC, jump into Bellator, things like that. Um, so we're just trying to give our fighters, an outlet, a voice, a way to build their brand, a way to do those things. And I think, like you said, it's really smart of them to ask questions, to work with their friends and family, to see what other fighters are doing, and then reach out to people like you, like Eric, like Mike. Ask questions. That's the biggest thing that you can do, is to try to grow your brand while you're also becoming a better fighter with your skill set in the gym. And before I let you go, Bob, I have one other thing I want to ask you. You have a common Facebook group with my co-founder Alex, and I know you're a huge Sixers fan. So what are your thoughts on how the Sixers were doing, before the NBA shut down, and where do you see the team going moving forward?
Well, that's 76th Street, and we're a Facebook group, and I love all the Philadelphia sports. I'm a homer, man. I root for all my teams, but the Sixers were underachieving this year, unfortunately, and they had a lot of injuries, and I'm not a huge fan of the coach. But I still believe they have enough talent, if they're healthy and playing their best, to compete for a championship. I still think the better days are ahead for this team. I love Ben Simmons. Once he starts shooting the ball, it's going to be lights out for him if he becomes a solid shooter, but he's still a great player. Who doesn't love Joel Embiid? You know, that's my guy. And they have all the pieces around him. Like I said, I thought they were underachieving this year. Part of that had to do with injuries. And, you know, we will see what happens when they resume. I believe, you know, in the future, there's definitely a championship or two for this squad. And I just, you know, they have to play better. Listen, every fighter, listen, I always tell a fighter when they lose, I ask them, name me some of the fighters who are undefeated. I mean, you can't really name any. There's been a lot of great champions in the UFC, and guess what? They all have losses. So you're not going to win everything and all the time. And just like fighters, basketball players have to learn from your losses and get better. And these guys are young enough that I'm hoping the future is bright for them. And tell Alex I said what's up. I love his work on that T-shirt. I'm looking forward to wearing one of them in some interviews.
Awesome. All right, last question before we go. Jalen Hurts draft. Do we like it or do we hate it?
I am one of the few that like it. I think, you know, quarterback is the most important position in all of the team sports. I love Carson Wentz. I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, but it's just like an insurance policy to me. This guy is going to learn for a couple or 2 or 3 years, and if Wentz does get injured, they have a young, talented guy behind him that's learning. He's not ready to play right now, but I value the quarterback position, so I like the pick. Most of my Eagles fans' friends don't like the pick. I was always a fan of his in college. I think he's a terrific athlete, but just like anybody, he still needs to get some experience. But I like the pick. I think Hurts is going to be a good player in this league.
Awesome, Bob. Hey, it was a pleasure getting to chat today, Bob. I enjoyed being on this side of the interview, but hopefully sooner than later I can be in the cage with you and you can be interviewing me after I get back in the win column.
Hey, man, I appreciate it, Bearcat. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Just give you a big shout out for your fight against Will Dill. Still one of the most grueling fights I've ever seen. Both of you guys were just friggin' beating each other up for all 3 rounds. And that's why I love the sport, man. That kind of fight right there where it's just a grind. And guess what? And then I see you two guys talking to each other, showing mad respect to each other on Facebook afterwards. That's why this sport is so great, because you can go in there and try to beat the living shit out of a guy, and then next thing you know, you're training with him. You're rooting for one another. That's what I love about the sport and the fighters.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, shout out to Will Dill. He's been sharing all of our stuff with the T-shirt company. You know, he's a great guy, and you know, hopefully, I get to see him soon. So, Bob, it was a pleasure. Really like talking to you today. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Take care, and we'll see you then.
Appreciate it, John. You too.
Awesome. Thank you.